The sky over Winterfell was darker than usual that evening, clouds heavy like the silence in the halls of House Stark. Ned Stark stood on the balcony, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Something felt wrong in the wind. It wasn't just the chill. It was something deeper. He could feel it in his bones. Danger was coming, and it wore a golden crown. The raven had arrived that morning, a message sealed with the royal stamp of King Joffrey Baratheon, but everyone knew he wasn't truly a Baratheon. He was a Lannister boy, wearing the crown of a lion. The letter was short, cold, and cruel. Winterfell is to be punished for treason. The North will bend the knee, or it will burn, by order of King Joffrey. Robb had stormed into the room, fists clenched. He's mad. He's just a boy pretending to be king. Ned had only nodded grimly. A boy with dragons under his feet is more dangerous than a wise man with a sword. They had only days to prepare. But no army could arrive in time. The Lannisters had already moved faster than expected. By the time the Starks gathered their bannermen, the royal forces were already at the gates. Sir Jaime Lannister led the charge not out of loyalty to Joffrey, but for Cersei's pride. Tywin had given his silent approval. Burn their honor, burn their home, show them what defiance costs. And so it began. Fire rained from the sky. Wildfire, the green flames known to melt flesh and stone alike, lit the skies like northern lights turned wicked. Winterfell, the ancient home of the Starks, screamed that night. Its stones cracked, its trees cried, and its people, oh, its people burned. Robb fought like a wolf possessed, cutting down Lannister soldiers with rage only a son watching his home fall could feel. But it wasn't enough. There were too many of them. The Lannisters came not to conquer, but to destroy. Arya had been taken by the Hound earlier that week. Sansa was still in King's Landing, trapped with the monster Joffrey. Bran and Rickon had been hidden away by Hodor and Osha, deep in the woods. Ned had made sure of that. But now, there was no time. The last walls of Winterfell were crumbling. The weirwood tree in the Godswood burned, its white bark bleeding red tears. "Ned!" shouted Maester Luwin, blood on his robes. "You have to go. Take Robb. There is nothing left here." Ned didn't want to. Every stone of Winterfell was part of him. But he wasn't just a lord, now he was a father. And Robb needed to live. The North needed a future, even if it was buried in ash. They escaped through the old crypt tunnels, the bones of their ancestors watching them with silent judgment. The wolves were leaving their den, chased out by fire and gold. As they rode into the woods, smoke behind them, silence ahead, Robb looked back once. "I will return," he whispered, voice shaking with fury. "And I will make them choke on their victory." Ned said nothing. He just kept riding. Winterfell was gone. The North had fallen, and the exiled wolves were on the run. But winter was still coming. And wolves, even in exile, don't forget, the nights were longer now. Ned Stark hadn't slept properly in days. Not since they escaped Winterfell's ashes. The cold forest that stretched far beyond the burned gates of their home had become their only shelter. The trees were their walls, and the moon was their only torch. Yet even in the vast wild, the fire in Robb's eyes refused to dim. They had lost everything, their home, their people, their name, maybe even their honor. But something still remained, something that could not be burned by wildfire. Vengeance. They rode deep into the North, not as lords, but as hunted men. Ned, once the Warden of the North, now wore a tattered cloak and kept his sword hidden beneath layers of fur. Robb, who once dreamed of leading armies, now walked silently behind his father, eyes fixed on the frozen path ahead, his direwolf Grey Wind always beside him, alert and growling at every strange noise. Everywhere they went, smoke seemed to follow. Villages that had sworn loyalty to House Stark were either gone or taken. Lannister banners now flew where once the direwolf ruled. People whispered. Some wept. Others turned them away in fear, not wanting to be caught sheltering traitors. Because that's what Joffrey had called them now, traitors to the crown. One night, while resting under the roots of a fallen tree, Robb finally spoke what had been brewing in his heart. "Father, we can't run forever." Ned looked up from the small fire they had built, no bigger than a candle's flame, just enough to keep them warm. "We're not running," he said. "We're surviving. There's a difference." Robb clenched his fists. "Winterfell burned because we trusted too long. We waited too long. We believed too long. And now look at us. Look at what Joffrey has done. And yet you still want to hide." Ned sighed. His face was tired, more from the weight of decisions than from the cold. "I've seen too many good men die chasing revenge without a plan. Vengeance without strategy is just a faster death." Robb didn't reply, but his silence was louder than any argument. That same night, a figure approached them from the dark. Grey wind snarled, but Ned raised a hand. "Hold," he whispered. A man stepped forward, wrapped in furs, his face hidden behind a hood. But when he spoke, the voice was familiar. "My lord, you look like a ghost." It was Galbart Glover, one of the Stark bannermen thought to be dead after the southern campaign. His eyes were wide, stunned to see Ned and Robb alive. "You're supposed to be ashes," he said. "Then you'll understand why we must speak carefully," Ned replied, standing. "Are you with us?" Glover dropped to one knee. "Always. The North remembers, my lord." Those words, "the North remembers," sparked something in Robb's chest. For the first time since Winterfell's fall, his heart beat, not just with sorrow, but with purpose. Within a week, they found Maegor Mormont, hiding with a small force of Bear Island men. Then Wyman Manderley, who had escaped from White Harbor after refusing to kneel to the Lannisters. Even Howland Reed, Ned's oldest and most secretive ally from the Neck, sent word through the swamps. The old gods have not forgotten the wolves. Piece by piece, the North's broken spine began to straighten. But not all were loyal. At last hearth, the Umbers had raised the Lannister banner. "They took my son," Great John Umber had growled. "They told me if I want him back alive, I must kneel." Robb wanted to fight. Ned placed a hand on his shoulder. "Not yet. We need more than swords. We need the truth." Because in the ashes of Winterfell, something had survived, something the Lannisters didn't know. Maester Luwin had given Ned one final letter before they escaped. It contained proof of Joffrey's illegitimacy, the truth about his birth, the same truth that had started the war. Robert Baratheon was never his father. He was the child of incest, a Lannister born of Cersei and Jaime. "If the kingdoms knew," Ned began. But Robb finished the thought. "They wouldn't burn our banners. They'd raise them." So that became the plan. Not just vengeance, revelation, revolution, return. They would gather the broken North, not just with fire and steel, but with truth, a truth too dangerous for the throne, a truth that could destroy a kingdom of lies. And when the time was right, when the snows were deep and the wolves were strong again, winter would come for the lion. Word travelled slow in the North, but not silence. And silence was what echoed in every village where Stark banners once flew. It wasn't just fear, it was waiting. Waiting for a howl in the distance, waiting for a sign that the wolves hadn't truly died. In the marshes of the Neck, under the strange trees that whispered to no one but the old gods, Ned Stark stood before Howland Reed. The man was smaller than Ned remembered, but his eyes still held that quiet strength. They'd fought together at the Tower of Joy. They'd buried secrets there, secrets that now had the power to burn the throne. "You still carry it?" Howland asked. Ned nodded, pulling out the sealed scroll Luwin had entrusted to him. "Joffrey is not the rightful king," he said. "We've both known it, but the truth means nothing without power." Howland looked toward the swamp where his people waited, camouflaged in mud and leaves. "Then it's time we give the truth teeth." While Ned worked in shadows, Robb moved like fire through the woods. No longer just a boy grieving the fall of his home, Robb was becoming something else, something harder. A young wolf forged in flame. Wherever he went, he whispered to the people, "The North is not lost. The wolves still hunt." Some were too scared to join him. But some didn't need convincing. In Deepwood Motte, Lady Alyson Mormont spat on a Lannister envoy and nailed his tongue to the wall. At Bear Island, little Lady Lyanna Mormont declared, "House Mormont remembers. House Mormont fights." Even some southern houses began to stir. News had spread that the Iron Throne had burned Winterfell not for war, but for pride, for fear, for domination, and the realm had seen too much of that already. Still, Robb knew strength wouldn't be enough. They needed a symbol, so he went back to the ruins, back to Winterfell. It was suicide, Ned had said, but Robb wouldn't listen. "If we are to rise, we rise from where we fell." He took 10 men. Grey Wind led the way, silent and angry. When they reached the broken gates, the smoke still hung in the air like ghosts. The weirwood tree was blackened, but not dead. Beneath the ash, its face still wept red. Robb knelt in front of it. "I swear to you," he whispered, "this will not be our grave." In the crypts below, they found more than bones. Hidden in the darkness were a few old Stark relics, swords untouched by fire, books untouched by time, and a broken piece of armor once worn by Brandon Stark. Robb picked it up and held it tight. His uncle had died by fire too, chained by a mad king. Now the mad king's grandson sat on the throne, repeating history. When they returned to the forest, Robb held up the burned direwolf banner, half ash, half cloth. "This is who we are now," he said to the gathering bannermen. "Burned, but breathing. Scarred, but still fighting." And that's when the real war began. They started hitting Lannister outposts. Quietly, strategically. No open war. Not yet just whispers of vengeance. A small group of Stark loyalists would slip into a camp, kill the commander, and vanish into the trees. Supplies would go missing. Wagons would catch fire. Ravens would be found with their necks snapped. They called them ghosts at first. Then they called them wolves, and the name spread, the exiled wolves. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Joffrey laughed from his throne, drunk on power and praise. "Let them scratch at the snow," he sneered. "Let them freeze." But Cersei wasn't laughing. Reports were piling up. Her golden grip on the realm was shaking, and she knew it. "They should be dead," she whispered one night to Tyrion. "We burned them. We burned their gods, their castle, their name." Tyrion poured himself a drink. "You burned the house, not the blood." And far to the east, even Daenerys Targaryen heard whispers in her court of a burned northern kingdom, rising again in silence. "The wolves are not dead," her advisor said. "They're just waiting for winter." Sansa Stark smiled with her lips, not her eyes. King's Landing was beautiful, in a way. Winterfell never was. Warm breezes, marble courtyards, golden fountains that sang all day, but none of it felt like home. Especially not with Joffrey sitting on the Iron Throne, staring at her like she was a pet he might decide to skin. She had learned to play her part, to bow, to smile, to thank him even when he humiliated her in front of the court. To sit quietly while he made the bard sing songs about the northern traitors and their stinking wolf gods. Each word cut her, but she bled in silence. Because Sansa Stark was no longer a naive girl. She was a prisoner with perfect posture, and prisoners survive by pretending they aren't trapped. The day the news reached her, she nearly collapsed. Whispers came through the servants first. Then from Varys, who appeared beside her in the garden like a shadow with a smile. "They say the wolves are back," he said softly, plucking a rose. "But not in chains." She couldn't speak, her throat clenched with both terror and hope. "Your brother and father," Varys went on, "are quite the mystery. Joffrey burned their home, yet the ashes won't stay still. Curious, isn't it?" Sansa looked away, forcing her hands to stay still. If she showed anything at all, it could get them all killed. Varys leaned in. "If they send a raven, if someone reaches out to you, choose carefully, my lady. The game has changed." And just like that, he was gone, leaving behind the scent of rose and secrets. That night, Sansa lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her chamber, remembering Robb's laughter, her father's voice, and the cold halls of Winterfell. She remembered the sound of snow, the silence of the godswood, the softness of her mother's hands brushing her hair. Gone. But maybe not forever. 3 days later, she found a note in her sleeve, folded so tightly it looked like a scrap of thread. No name, no signature, just 5 words. "The wolf watches from shadow." Her heart almost stopped. She didn't know how it had reached her. Maybe a servant, maybe someone working under Varys or the spider himself. But she understood the message. They were alive, and they were close, far away. Ned Stark sat in a tavern just outside of Riverrun, wearing the armor of a nameless hedge knight. His beard was longer now, his face gaunt from sleepless nights and too many risks. Across the table sat an old ally, Sir Brynden Tully, the Blackfish. "You're mad," Brynden whispered, drinking deeply. "You want to smuggle that letter into King's Landing? Do you know what they'll do if they catch you?" Ned placed the scroll on the table, wrapped tightly in stark grey. "This truth can break their throne. It must reach the right ears. Not the lords, the people." Brynden leaned back, eyes narrowed. "And who do you think the people will believe? A ghost? A fugitive? They'll believe their eyes when the truth spreads. When the small folk know the king is a bastard born of incest, the ground will shake. And if it doesn't," Ned looked at the flickering candle between them, "then we die, but not as liars, not as cowards. We die as wolves." Back in the north, Robb stood before hundreds now. The exiled army was growing Mormont men, Reed scouts, northern villagers who had nothing left to lose. They were not polished like Lannister soldiers. They didn't wear gold or silk. But they had rage, they had memory, and they had reason. Robb raised the burned banner of the direwolf. "The South thinks we're broken," he shouted. "They think we'll crawl back into the snow and freeze. But they forget the North doesn't kneel. We remember, we wait, and when we rise, we don't rise alone." Cheers erupted around him. Grey wind howled beside him, torches lit the hilltop. And for the first time since Winterfell fell, Robb Stark felt something powerful in his bones. He wasn't just a boy with a sword. He was a king without a crown. Yet, in King's Landing, Joffrey watched the flames in the fireplace, bored. "They say Robb Stark calls himself king in the north again," he muttered. Cersei smiled tightly. "He can call himself a dragon if he likes. He still bleeds like the rest." But in the shadows, Varys heard the whispers. And in the dungeons, Sansa lit a candle in her window, a small flicker of defiance. Because now she knew the truth. The wolves were hunting again. The Lannister soldiers didn't see it coming. At dawn, the camp near Moat Cailin was quiet, just the sound of snoring men, the clatter of pots, and the soft hum of a cold wind rolling across the marsh. They thought the north had been broken, scattered, hiding like rats. But rats don't howl. From the trees they came like shadows, silent, fast, wolves in the skins of men. Robb Stark led the charge himself, grey wind at his side, teeth dripping with fury. His eyes were hard now, not with fear but purpose. This was not a raid. This was a message. No mercy. No survivors. The Lannisters never stood a chance. By the time the sun broke through the clouds, the Red Lion banners were soaked in blood and trampled in the mud. Robb rode through the remains, his sword dripping, his armor scratched but proud. He pulled down the largest Lannister banner and threw it into the fire. Then he raised the scorched grey direwolf flag, the same one he had pulled from Winterfell's ruins. "We are not ghosts," he told his men. "We are the storm they tried to burn." Word spread like wildfire, only this time it wasn't fire that burned, but ice. The wolves had taken back Moat Cailin, the ancient gate to the north. The south no longer had a straight road to march through. For the first time since Winterfell fell, the north had a wall again. In King's Landing, panic was spreading like rot behind golden doors. Joffrey smashed a goblet against the throne room wall. "They said he was dead. I saw the flames. I ordered it myself." Cersei kept her voice calm, though her hands trembled slightly. "You burned a house, not a bloodline. They killed 200 of our men," the Lord Commander of the City Watch said, keeping his eyes low. "And they left this." He handed her a piece of burned cloth, the sigil of House Stark, smeared with blood but unmistakable. Under it, scrawled in charcoal, "Winter still remembers." Tyrion chuckled from the shadows. "Looks like your enemies didn't turn to ashes after all." Joffrey turned on him. "Why are you laughing? They're traitors." Tyrion poured himself a drink. "They were traitors. Now they're heroes to half the realm." Cersei ignored them both. Her mind was spinning not just with worry about Robb, but about Ned. She never saw a body. No head, no corpse. Just whispers that Ned Stark had vanished in the chaos after Winterfell burned. If he was alive, and if he had proof of Joffrey's true bloodline, it wasn't just war they were facing. It was collapse. That night, inside the Red Keep, a servant girl entered Sansa's chamber with a tray of food. But underneath the bread and meat was something else, a strip of parchment sealed in wax. She waited until the door shut behind the girl, then unfolded it with shaking fingers. It was a name. Sir Aric Florent. Below it, a location, a brothel in Flea Bottom. And beneath that, "He carries what you need." Sansa stared at the paper for a long time. Her heart raced. She didn't know if it was her father who sent it, or Robb, or Varys. Maybe it was all of them. Maybe it was no one. Maybe it was a trap. But she had to try. 2 nights later, cloaked in a servant's gown and walking like a ghost, Sansa Stark stepped into the stink and smoke of Flea Bottom. The city was loud, ugly, drunk, but she didn't feel fear anymore. She felt hunger, not for food, for justice. She found Sir Aric in the corner of the brothel, drunk, slurring, but sharp enough to recognize her eyes. He gave her a scroll, sealed with the direwolf. "Your father's alive," he whispered. "But not for long. He's here hiding under another name. If you want to help him, you must play your part." Sansa took the scroll and left without a word. Later that night, in her chambers, she broke the seal and read the contents. The truth was written in her father's hand, Joffrey's parentage, the proof Maester Luwin had preserved, and names of lords who could still be trusted. At the bottom, one final line: "I know you are still brave." She folded the letter with tears in her eyes, but her jaw was tight, her hands steady. If they wanted a game, she would play it. Not as a lady, as a wolf. At the edge of the realm, Ned Stark met a contact under cover of night. A merchant ship, sworn to House Tully, agreed to smuggle him into Blackwater Bay. The capital was about to receive its oldest enemy, not with armies, with truth. And truth, in the right hands, could destroy more than swords ever could. Ned Stark stepped off the ship, disguised as a weathered sellsword named Aaron Snow. His face was covered in stubble, his northern accent roughened by silence, his gait slowed by weeks in hiding. But his eyes, those sharp, grey eyes, still carried the weight of honor, and now the fire of revenge. King's Landing hadn't changed. The smell of rot, piss, and perfume still hung in the air like a curse. Gold cloaks still swaggered through the streets with their chins high, and nobles still lived above the dirt as if the people below were animals. But something else was here now, something new. Fear. It lingered in the alleyways, whispered behind curtains, danced between the stalls of the market. The wolves were back, and the city knew it. Ned's first contact was an old blacksmith who had once worked in the Red Keep during Robert's reign. The man didn't recognize him at first, but when Ned handed him a silver direwolf pendant, the man's knees nearly buckled. "I thought you were dead," he whispered. "I was," Ned said quietly. "Now, I need your help to kill a lie." Inside the Red Keep, Sansa moved like a thread through a spider's web, careful not to disturb it, not yet. She had memorized the words in her father's letter over and over again until they were carved into her thoughts. The line that echoed the most: "Do not trust anyone who wears a crown or wants one." Even Tyrion, who had shown her more kindness than most, couldn't be fully trusted. He played the game, and Sansa had no more room for players. She needed allies, the kind who didn't smile when they stabbed you. Lord Baelish had been watching her lately, eyes full of false softness. He still thought her broken, still thought she might bend. Let him think that. Let them all think that. In truth, Sansa had already made her first move. 2 nights ago, she had visited Sir Eric Florent again and delivered her father's scroll into the hands of someone unexpected, Grand Maester Pycelle. It was a gamble. Pycelle was a coward, a man who bent with the wind. But Sansa had cried, pleaded, told him the truth, as only a helpless girl could, that her father was alive, that Joffrey was not the true king, and that Westeros was one breath away from war. Pycelle had taken the scroll with shaking hands. This is treason." "No," she'd whispered, "this is justice." She didn't know if he'd act, but she knew he was afraid. And that was a start. Joffrey, meanwhile, was unraveling. Every day, more rumors surfaced that the North was rallying, that Robb had united the wildlings, that Ned Stark was alive and marching south. The king screamed at his council, cursed his guards, had 3 kitchen boys whipped for serving cold pigeon pie. He wanted blood. He wanted proof. And most of all, he wanted Sansa to suffer. "She's feeding them lies," he shouted. "She's the reason they haven't surrendered. She's the bait." Cersei slapped him. Hard. For the first time in front of the court. "You are not a mad king," she growled, gripping his collar. "Don't make me regret giving you that crown." Joffrey stared at her like a boy about to cry, but then his eyes darkened. "I want her watched. No more freedom. If she breathes without permission, I'll cut her tongue out myself." That night, Ned Stark stood across from the Red Keep, hidden in the shadows, watching the castle that had swallowed his family. He had a plan not of war, but of exposure. He would not raise a sword. Not yet. He would raise the truth. And for that, he needed one last thing: the man who had forged Robert Baratheon's bastard boy Gendry. The blacksmith's apprentice, with the blood of kings in his veins. Back in her chambers, Sansa stared at her reflection in the mirror. The bruises on her wrists from Joffrey's latest tantrum were beginning to fade, but she didn't cover them. She wanted the court to see, to remember. A knock came. A servant girl entered, eyes wide. She placed a folded piece of parchment on the table and vanished. Sansa opened it slowly. Only 2 words. "He's here." Her heart didn't race. She just smiled, a small, knowing smile. The kind of smile wolves wear before they tear out a lion's throat. The Grand Sept of Baelor had never been so full. Lords, ladies, and merchants packed the hall, buzzing like flies around spilled wine. Whispers filled the air, louder than the bells outside. A special royal address had been called, unannounced, urgent. "Joffrey," they said, was preparing to crush the last of the Northern Rebellion. But that wasn't the truth. The real storm was standing just outside the sept, cloaked in plain robes, a hood low over his face. Ned Stark, the man they thought long dead, waited in silence. Beside him stood Sir Brynden Tully, sword at his hip, and a pair of silent guards sworn to House Reed. "Once you step in," Brynden said, "there's no turning back." Ned didn't blink. "Then I don't plan to step out." Inside, King Joffrey sat on a golden chair placed at the sept's center, eyes narrowed, lips curled. Cersei sat beside him, calm on the surface, but her eyes kept darting to the door. Something in the air didn't feel right, and for once she couldn't control it. The High Septon began his speech. "We gather here in service of the realm, for the light of the Seven must shine upon the truth." He didn't finish, because the doors slammed open, and silence swallowed the hall. A man walked in slowly, face still hidden, scroll in one hand, sword sheathed at his hip. People began to murmur. Cersei stood. "Who dares?" The hood fell, and the hall gasped. "Eddard Stark," someone whispered. "It can't be." But it was. Ned walked to the center, unfazed by the chaos blooming around him. His voice was calm, firm, unshaken. "I am not here as a rebel. I am not here with an army. I am here with truth." Joffrey leapt to his feet. "Guards!" But Ned raised his hand, and from the back of the sept, more guards entered. Not gold cloaks, northern men, Riverlanders. And at their center stood Grand Maester Pycelle, trembling, holding a second scroll in his hands. Ned nodded. "Read it." Pycelle's voice shook. This document bears the seal of Maester Luwin of Winterfell. It details the lineage of King Joffrey Baratheon." "Don't you dare!" Cersei screamed, but no one stopped him. "Who is not the son of Robert Baratheon, but of Queen Cersei Lannister and her twin brother, Sir Jaime Lannister." The hall exploded in gasps, screams, shouts. Nobles pushed back in disbelief. A few guards even hesitated, hands falling from their swords. Joffrey's face turned white, then purple with rage. Lies, all lies. But Ned wasn't done. "I bring witnesses," he said. "Baratheon blood still lives. You've hunted them. You've killed them. But one still breathes." And then, like a ghost, Gendry stepped forward from the shadows, his eyes wide but proud. "The crown is false," Ned said. "The king is false, and the throne must answer." In the chaos that followed, the Red Keep locked down. Cersei tried to hold control. She summoned every loyal Lannister, every sellsword she could trust. But even within the court, loyalties had begun to shift. Too many had suffered under Joffrey's cruelty. Too many had heard the whispers. And now, the truth stood in front of them like a mountain on fire. That night, Sansa was summoned to the Queen's solar. Cersei paced like a lion in a cage. "You were behind this," she hissed. "You traitorous little witch." Sansa didn't flinch. "You murdered my family. You destroyed my home. Did you really think I'd marry your monster and give him sons?" Cersei raised her hand to strike her, but this time Sansa caught her wrist mid-air. No more slaps, no more silence. And for one long second, Cersei saw it, the wolf in the girl's eyes. Outside the city, riders were already moving. Messages were flying to every corner of the realm. Robb Stark had taken the twins. The Freys had bent the knee. The North was rising faster than anyone could stop. In the streets of King's Landing, chants began to stir among the common folk. "False king! Bastard king!" The small folk didn't need proof. They only needed belief, and the wolves had given it to them. That night, Joffrey locked himself in the throne room, guards posted at every corner. He sat alone on the Iron Throne, sword in hand, staring into the dark like a child afraid of the monsters he created. Because the wolves were no longer whispering, they were howling, and the throne had never felt colder. The sky over King's Landing had never looked so dark. From the Red Keep's highest tower, Cersei Lannister watched the sea of torches rise from the North Gate. The smoke of fear had finally reached her, and for the first time in years, her hands trembled. "They're here," she whispered. Beneath her, the city shook with unrest. Riots had begun in Flea Bottom, gold cloaks deserting their posts, banners torn from windows. The lie was dead, and with it, the golden hold the Lannisters once had on the realm. Robb Stark's army had reached the gates, not just Northmen, but Riverlanders, loyal Tully men, Mormonts, Reeds, even a few Baratheon loyalists who remembered Robert's true blood. At the centre rode the young wolf himself, face colder than the northern wind, grey wind at his side, snarling toward the city. Robb didn't want peace. He wanted justice, and nothing less. Inside the Red Keep, Ned Stark stood beside Gendry in the Great Hall, the Iron Throne looming behind them like a beast ready to devour its next victim. The hall was filled with nobles, some in disbelief, others silent in guilt. The High Septon stood close, clutching his robes like a shield. Pycelle, old and broken, now sat slumped in a chair, muttering prayers to gods he no longer believed in. Tyrion stood near the shadows, watching everything, not speaking, but noting every betrayal, every silent nod, every coward's breath. Joffrey had not come down in hours. No one knew where he was, some said the dungeons, others the sept, crying for the gods to strike down his enemies. Sansa knew. She stood outside his chambers, alone, silent. She had chosen not to run, not to flee into Robb's army. Her war was already inside the walls. The door creaked open. Joffrey stood there, crown crooked, eyes red, sword in hand. "You helped them," he said quietly. "I told the truth," Sansa answered, steady. "You were going to be my queen. I'd rather die a wolf than live as your wife." He raised the sword, but his hands were shaking. He wasn't the Mad King. He was a scared little boy, desperate to be feared, incapable of being loved. Sansa didn't flinch. She stepped forward, took the blade in her hand, and pushed it away from her chest. "Do it," she said. "Be remembered like your grandfather, burning children and slaying girls." But he couldn't. He dropped the sword and fell to his knees. The gates of King's Landing opened at noon, not by surrender, but by collapse. The gold cloaks had abandoned the walls. Lannister soldiers threw down their weapons, and Robb Stark rode into the capital not as a conqueror, but as a storm. The people cheered him. They chanted his name. The true king, the wolf, returns. The North remembers. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He marched to the Red Keep. In the throne room, he found his father waiting, standing beneath the Iron Throne. Ned turned as Robb entered, their eyes locking after what felt like lifetimes. "Father," Robb said, falling to one knee. But Ned shook his head. "No. You've earned the right to stand." Together, they faced the throne. Ned looked at it with nothing but contempt. "1,000 swords melted into one," he muttered, "built by blood, kept by lies." "And now?" Robb asked. Now, the room was filled with silence. Varys, Tyrion, even the High Septon waited for the next move. Ned turned to the gathering. "The truth has broken the crown. Let the realm decide what rises next." Joffrey was found the next morning, dead in his chambers. A vial of poison spilled beside his bed. Whether he took it himself or someone helped, no one ever knew. But no one mourned. Cersei vanished that same night. Some said she boarded a ship bound for Essos. Others whispered that she slit her wrists in the bathtub of the Queen's tower. Only silence followed her name. Weeks later, in the Godswood built just beyond the city's edge, the northern banners flew beside the weirwood tree. Robb stood before a council of lords and people alike. They had begged him to take the throne. He refused. "The North will never kneel again," he declared. "We will govern ourselves with honor. not crowns, and the other kingdoms followed. The realm shattered into its old pieces, like it was meant to be not ruled by one boy on a throne of blades, but by people who remembered, who rose, who bled for truth. Sansa returned to the north with her father and brother, no longer a girl, no longer a pawn. She walked through the rebuilt gates of Winterfell, snow falling around her, and whispered to the wind, "We came home." And the wind answered with silence and peace. For the first time in a long, long time. The wolves were never dead. They were just waiting for the snow to fall.